get to do it. Well, I see the clock tells us it's straight up 12 noon, and those of you who have attended in the past know I like to be punctual. Welcome to the Beef on Dairy Dialogue webinar series, an extension of the annual Dairy Beef Short Course held in conjunction with the Central Plains Dairy Expo each March. The short course is the longest running program focusing on steers with dairy genetics in the U.S., with 15 years of continuous programming. The short course is sponsored by the I-29 University, a consortium of extension specialists from Iowa State University, University of Minnesota, University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and South Dakota State University. The 2026 Beef on Dairy Dialogue series continues today with a presentation by Dr. Kendall Swanson, a professor of beef production systems in the Department of Animal Sciences at North Dakota State University. As always, Dr. Swanson, the podium is yours.
Okay, so thank you, Fred, and for the invitation. And it's been fun to be involved with this and keep learning more about kind of these interesting topics. So anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about energetics of changes in liver mass and health in calves, and kind of how I got started um, discussing or thinking about this is I'm a member of a USDA regional feedlot committee, and we put on or organized a conference last fall on beef on dairy. So I've done some work in kind of energetics and efficiency in the past, and I gave a short talk there, and that's kind of how I got invited to this as well, I think. So let's move on here if I can. There we go. So yeah, so I'm just going to talk. These are kind of the five topics I'll touch on. Unique aspects of beef on dairy and dairy calves for finishing, which I think most of the audience is pretty familiar with. Some things on gastrointestinal development and then energetics of liver and gastrointestinal tissue, um, and also with tissue health and repair, and then some final thoughts and recommendations at the end. So this is kind of my take on beef on dairy or dairy genetics in the feedlot. And um, first of all, dairy genetics are, I think, dairy cattle are bred to eat, and they're great at that, right? So a lot of times when we'll do a lot of digestibility, nutrient balance kind of studies here at North Dakota, and a lot of times for those types of studies, we like to use dairy influenced animals because they will continue to eat, and sometimes the more of the beef genetics don't like to be held quite the same in that when we're taking lots of samples and things, and they may not eat quite as well. So anyway, so this is a great thing about them. They're typically fed concentrate diets for long periods of time. So wean pretty early, right? And then a lot of times, yeah, fed those diets, higher grain type diets for a long time. So then there may be greater incidence of liver abscesses. There's a lot of opportunities for stressors over the different transitions and things such as that. And so, yeah, there could be more incidents for liver abscesses because of that. And we'll get talking about why that's important a little bit later. So we're going to focus quite a bit on the liver today, also a little bit on the gastrointestinal tract, but the liver, so that blue arrow is pointing to the liver and the circulatory system around the liver. So basically the gastrointestinal tract, all the nutrients that it absorbs and all the other kind of byproducts and things are transferred to the liver, and then the liver kind of decides what to do with those tissues or with those compounds. And it really is central to kind of coordinating the nutrients and other things that get to the whole body for growth or milk production or whatever the goal is. So this just kind of gives something similar for a dairy calf, and I think the development of the gastrointestinal tract is quite fascinating in ruminants. So they're born with a relatively small rumen compared to what it would be later in life, and the abomasum is quite large. So they're born more as a kind of like a monogastric or a non-ruminant, and then they transition into becoming a ruminant over time as they begin to eat solid feed and get weaned and things like that. So I just summarized a couple studies that we've done in the past and in the calf study, we were looking at some amino acid supplementation and milk replacer. And then the finished steer study we were looking at some feed efficiency factors. But in both of these, we measured both liver weight and reticulorumen. So that would be the reticulum and the rumen combined. And I just have them presented on this slide as a percent of body weight. So we see the Holstein calf, they have bigger livers relative to their body weight. And Holsteins probably just have larger livers than beef breeds would. But then if we look at the finished steer, you can see how much larger that reticulorumen becomes. If we looked later at the Holstein steer, if we finished it, it would also be a larger proportion of body weight. But this just kind of looks at differences in some of the anatomy between calves versus older animals. Okay, so the development of the liver and gastrointestinal tract. So the liver is quite a bit of it is really developed at birth, and it's ready to do its job. But the gastrointestinal tract really is going through some more developmental changes. First, it needs to transition into receiving milk and digesting and utilizing that milk, and then the gastrointestinal tract develops to be able to utilize dry feed. So there's a lot of transitions that go on in the first kind of few months of life that are important down the road and in that kind of the lifetime of that calf. So this slide just shows kind of in a picture what the different sizes of the gastrointestinal tract look through different ages. So as I said before, the abomasum or true stomach is quite large early on, and the rumen then develops and gets larger, and it's by far the largest component or compartment when that animal becomes mature and after weaning. Okay, so that's just a little background on kind of the anatomy and function of those tissues. If we look at energetic efficiency and what influences energetic efficiency, if we think of the whole animal, the physiological state, kind of the genetic potential of the animal, those influence energetic efficiency. If you think of a dairy cow, high producing dairy cow, it has different um, of physiology than say a mature beef cow, dry beef cow, right? So um, also body composition, feed intake, digestive function, stresses and physical activity, all those types of things influence whole animal energetic efficiency. And if we look at one of the things I'm quite interested in is kind of what is it at the tissue level that um, makes one animal maybe more efficient than another animal. And some of these factors like cell proliferation and turnover, ion transport, protein turnover, and the kind of mitochondrial function, things like that, um, utilize a lot of energy within each cell, and each cell and each tissue in the body is different as well related to that. So um, someday maybe we can get a better kind of coordinated idea of how all those things influence energetic efficiency and if we can manipulate those in a way to make the animal more efficient. So this is kind of the really the net energy system which we use in dairy and beef cattle systems. And kind of the one of the main aspects of it is we split things into maintenance functions and energy then that's used for production. So that's kind of a way to simplify the complex system that it really is, but that we can then put numbers to things and have nutrient requirement models and things like that. So a lot of it really comes down to, I guess, kind of workload management on where does the energy go? Does it go to maintenance, to taking care of that animal and all of its tissues, or is it going to production like growth or milk production? So if we could shift how much or shift that more towards production and less towards maintenance, we could improve energetic efficiency. This is maintenance component is a very large component of the overall energetic needs, and this is older research from Farrell and Jenkins, where they quantified kind of the total amount of energy that goes towards maintenance energy requirements over the entire production system for beef cattle. So the clear white bars are what goes to maintenance. So a pretty large proportion of the total energy that the animal and the system uses goes to maintaining the animal. A lot of that goes to maintaining the cow, right, during when she's producing her calves. We can break down the energy losses to different types of losses. And this is an example of that in a high grain type diet. The green bar on the bottom is how much energy is retained. That's what's going towards growth. So it's positive. These animals are growing, right? Then the others are the losses. And I just wanted to point out the red part is the heat production. And when we think about maintenance, a pretty large proportion of the heat production is going towards maintenance. So if you think all the tissues just all the functions that it takes just to keep those tissues alive, with those functions, heat production is a side um, effect or a byproduct of that maintenance. So um, it's a pretty big proportion of energetic losses or energetic requirements. Okay, so we also can think of this kind of relative to different tissues, and different tissues have different kind of relative importances of to the body for overall energetic needs. So, um, for example, the liver uses a lot of energy because it works really hard. So if we have a bigger or a larger liver, that can influence the energy requirements of the animals. So first of all, the masses of these different tissues, but then we also can have um, kind of different energy use within each tissue. You can have a more efficient liver or more inefficient liver, where you'd have more energy use or less per gram of tissue. A lot of times we measure that either as oxygen consumption or heat production. And then finally, tissue health also is important. So if we're using energy to try to take care of the health or deal with disease or some type of stress, then that energy can't be used for other productive purposes. It's used to really as a maintenance function to take care of that tissue and take care of that animal. So the kind of if we think of like the gut tissues, liver, other, I call them visceral like tissues, um, heart, lungs, pancreas. Um, so these are kind of typically um, tissues that aren't consumed as much for as a as a food product, right? We think of beef, at least in the United States. They're a pretty small proportion of the total body weight, but they utilize a lot of energy. So the gastrointestinal tract, um, it works very hard to try to digest and absorb all these nutrients. The liver does a lot by um, kind of coordinating all the events with where nutrients get metabolized and used. Yeah, if you think of the heart and lungs, pancreas, those also have very important functions within in the body. So the gastrointestinal tract alone may be 20 to 25%, but if we add the liver, heart, lungs, pancreas, we get towards 50% of total energy use or oxygen consumption. Um, the skeletal muscle is also really important, maybe 40% of total body weight. And because of that, it uses quite a bit of energy, but actually quite a bit less than some of these other gastrointestinal liver tissue and things like that. So that tissue is less metabolically active than gut and liver tissue. So this is interesting to me because if we can make these tissues or manipulate these tissues or nutrition or something to make them more efficient, we could have pretty large impacts on efficiency of growth or efficiency of whatever type of production. Okay, so just had some kind of interesting things to kind of quickly discuss here, but this is in humans and rats. But if we look at in humans, the liver and gastrointestinal tract are really smaller than they are in most other, or really all other species. Um, and we'll kind of get to why that might be in a little bit. And the brain's also pretty small, that the brain uses a lot of energy in humans. It wouldn't use as much in non-humans as kind of the systems have developed differently in humans and other animals. Um, this is just a really interesting book on kind of the philosophy of how humans have evolved to utilize nutrients efficiently, and also, I guess, to supply energy for brain and neural functions. So it's called Catching Fire, and it's an interesting book. But this really kind of the scientific theory of this is that um, over time, um, humans have consumed more high quality diets and um, done more cooking and made their nutrients more available, maybe even um, to detriment now if we think of all the kind of ultra processed foods that we eat too much of, right? But because of this, this has allowed for the brain to evolve to be larger, and the gut and liver, other tissues to become smaller. Just another, I'm not going to go into this very much here, but if we predicted what the size of the human gut and brain should be versus what we observe, it's very, very different. So, and this is probably kind of the evolution of humans over time. Okay, so back to ruminants. So this is a review paper that Joel Caton and Mark Bauer, who I worked with here at NDSU, wrote several years ago. But if we look at energy expenditure of different tissues in a ruminant, the digestive tract utilizes um, kind of on average about 15% of total energy, and the liver about 21%. So they utilize a lot of energy. I think that's the main point of that. So can we influence kind of that energy use? If we think first, one of the first things that influences energy use is just the size of those organs or tissues. Things like diet, physiological state, and tissue health can influence the mass of these tissues. So this is from a review paper in 1990 out of Colorado State, but and they kind of summarized a whole bunch of different research. And this is actually from sheep, cattle, and growing cattle, and also lactating cows. Um, and they charted this all together, and they looked at how metabolizable energy intake influences the mass of the liver. And they put the liver relative to metabolic body weight, so that they could look across the different size species or animals. And you see it's very linear even across those very different um, kind of physiological states of those animals or species. So the liver is very responsive to nutrition, and it changes relative to what we're feeding the animal. Um, I just kind of put on the right here that if we do get really high intake, we also can have effects on liver abscesses. More variation in intake can influence that, and these things all can influence um, growth and requirements. So this is a generalization. If we can look at things a little more in detail as well, but this is also the gastrointestinal tract. Same thing happens for gastrointestinal tract. We feed higher amounts of energy, we get larger kind of relative sizes of those tissues. I just thought that this was another um, from Farrell and Jenkins again, but I thought this was really interesting because it shows kind of different levels of nutrition. So we have high, medium, low, and very low, and have the different sizes, or well, the mass of the whole body, but then also different tissues, and then also the fasting heat production, which is kind of like the maintenance requirements of those animals. And if we look at body weight decreased about 20%, but if we look at the digestive tract and liver, almost 40 and 50%. So one of the ways the animal adapts to very low nutrition is it doesn't need as large a digestive tract and liver, so it basically those shrink so that the tissues, other tissues can be maintained. So like the heart didn't decrease nearly as much as the others. If we looked at brain weight, it probably didn't change much at all because that needs to be maintained in all situations. So um, just kind of an example, kind of showing the neat physiology of how animals respond to different um, nutritional treatments. Um, Another example, this shows how a physiological state can influence um, gastrointestinal liver mass um, and energy use. And if we look at a non-lactating dairy cow versus a lactating dairy cow, one of the ways that she adapts to that or responds to that is she increases her gastrointestinal tract size or mass to be able to consume enough feed and get enough energy to get her through lactation. So pretty amazingly, um, like the gastrointestinal tract can increase in mass 30, almost 35 or 20%. So 34 kilograms. That's a lot, right? Liver also increases a lot. Think of muscle, um, and muscle may decrease a little bit, right? If we looked at maybe some other fat depots, those might decrease some as well. So physiological state can influence this as well. Um, Here's one example. This is some research we did a few years ago, but we even looked at kind of how we feed the dam or the mother, and this isn't sheep, but how we feed the sheep, the ewe, and how that influences her offspring. And this suggests, okay, if we feed different types of diets, we had a um, kind of a control diet, and then we restricted um, them also, or also had another supplement in there. But if we restricted those um, dams, that resulted in kind of a more efficient liver in the um, in the lambs at 50 days of age. So we might be able to even influence things um, later in life for kind of developmental programming. Also, if we overfeed specific nutrients, we can influence tissue mass and energy use. I think this is an important thing to consider just with diet formulation and things and trying to maximize efficiency. Um, if we overfeed something like protein or amino acids, we can't utilize all of that. So we need to get rid of some of the excess, right? So like protein and amino acids, we have excess nitrogen. It needs to get converted to urea by the liver and then is excreted in urine. So this really increases the workload or what that liver is doing. There's been research suggesting that increases also results in a bigger liver, and it also results in more energy being used for to maintain that liver, right? So, and to synthesize that urea. So that can alter or kind of shift that amount of energy that goes towards maintenance versus growth or production. Um, okay, just a little bit on tissue and cellular events contributing to energy use. And I'd mentioned some of these kind of cellular activities earlier. You see ureagenesis is on there, which we just talked about. If we have excess nitrogen, we need to get rid of that nitrogen. Um, the second point, mitochondrial function or uncoupling, is another aspect to consider. And if we think of all these other ones, it's really interconnected with all of these. And the mitochondria, sometimes we call that the powerhouse of the cell. It's the part of the cell that's taking nutrients, basically. It's kind of the final step of that nutrient metabolism that converts them to an energy unit that we can use in the body. So, and that energy unit is ATP. So that's kind of the currency if the cell needs to do work, like if it needs to transport a nutrient into the cell so it can um, get energy or get amino acids or minerals or vitamins. Um, it can use ATP to do that. So, um, and that's kind of the basis of the cellular energy metabolism. I found this quote in a scientific paper a few years ago, and it's just kind of amazing to think of the amount of kind of synthesis and things that's going on in the body. But um, they estimated that in a adult human, um, that adult human would generate about 2 million kilograms, or that's about 5 million pounds, right, of ATP from ADP in a 75-year lifespan. So that ADP is going to ATP to be used. One of the phosphoruses come off, and then that supplies energy for whatever the function is. It goes back to ADP, and that cycle continues, right? So we're producing that much ATP basically over a lifetime to maintain ourselves and to do all the activities that we do. So this slide shows kind of the molecular aspects of that, but on the right you see ADP gets converted to ATP. So that's the goal of kind of metabolizing the nutrients, maybe like carbohydrates like glucose or something like that, to produce energy in the form of ATP. One thing that can happen is this process can kind of get uncoupled, and so it's not efficient. And in the end, then we produce heat off of that, and that can be a good thing in like infants, neonatal animals, but in other animals it might not be a good thing because it's an inefficiency. Um, if we think of feeding unbalanced diets or if we're stressed, these things put stress on the mitochondria, and then we get more of this uncoupling. So it's kind of a compounded, um, all kinds of activities related to decreasing efficiency, related to kind of improper nutrition or stress or disease. So, kind of the overall topic related to this webinar is liver mass and how liver mass might influence energetics, and how liver abscesses might influence energetics. And um, we're beginning to do more research on this topic, and it seems that yes, there are uh, with liver abscesses, we probably are increasing liver mass. Some of that is no doubtedly abscess tissue. Some of it could be increased healthy tissue to kind of also help overcome having that abscess tissue. Um, in the end, this probably has some negative consequences on the energetics of the tissue. So, what is the energy requirement of this response? Also, yeah, and is this liver mass or is this abscess tissue? So, abscess tissue have inflammation, immune responses, tissue repair that has to be done to try to get over that abscess or live through that abscess. But first, let's think about non-abscess liver. And I did some calculations here to try to kind of estimate. So what happens if we have a bigger liver? Um, what does that really do to the energy requirements of the animal? So in this case, I just assumed that the liver consumes about 20% of the net energy for maintenance functions, and it weighs about 1.25% of body weight. So I went through all these calculations here, um, um, and we see that um, in the 1.25% size liver, the requirements are about 9.5 megacals for that animal. 1.9 of that goes to the liver. If we increase the mass to 1.5%, then we get about 2.28 going to the um, liver instead of the 1.5, and net energy maintenance requirements increase to about 9.9. So that's about a 4.2% increase in requirements to maintain that liver and thus maintain that animal. So in the end, at least by my crude calculations, about a quarter-pound decrease in average daily gain for that calf or that steer. So just to look at some other kind of estimates of how liver abscesses might influence energy use and energy requirements. This is from a review just a few years ago, and they estimated that, and I circled on the left there that if liver abscess incidence is 60%, which can and is seen in um, dairy or dairy beef type cattle fed to finish. That would be about 4.8% decrease in net energy or increase in net energy requirements for maintenance. So which is kind of close to my estimate, but probably a little bit higher. And if we think this is 60%, I think no doubt some of that increase in requirements is due to the abscesses and the energy it takes to deal with those abscesses. Okay, so I think really the tissue health is a very important component of this. And um, these are just some pictures of livers or of rumens from animals that had some acidosis or digestive upset in the rumen. So you see the kind of sloughing of some of the tissue, and this is partly, at least, what's thought, whether it's in the rumen or other parts of the gastrointestinal tract, allows for bacterial absorption, and then those go to the liver and produce abscesses. So a lot of times in research we'll do abscess scoring. And this Elanco liver scoring system was developed many years ago. So this is just pictures of the different kind of categories of liver abscesses that you could see. Um, Besides feed efficiency, I just wanted to quickly point this out. I think no doubt it has an effect on that, but it also affects kind of carcass outcomes. If you think of the liver might be condemned, there might be, if there's adhesions or something, there might have to be trimming done and other things related to carcass yield and quality that can be influenced by the liver abscesses. So this is some data that Ty Lawrence shared with me last fall, but um, they did this is some interesting work where they collected livers from these different categories of abscessed livers, and they um, basically separated them into abscess tissue and regular tissue. And you can see the more abscesses and more severe abscesses, up to over 13% of that tissue was abscessed tissue and not healthy tissue. So if you think of that, it takes energy to deal with that. I've had this before, so we had to take more energy for maintenance than to use for production. That's just some kind of diagram to kind of support that. More abscesses, more maintenance requirements, less energy towards growth. Okay, so I think really in ruminants, we don't understand very well how to quantify these kind of requirements of health if we have healthy animals versus unhealthy animals. This is an example of some research in pigs where they challenge pigs with LPS is an endotoxin that causes the animal to have a immune response to try to fight that toxin. So, and then they measured maintenance requirements basically for animals that were dosed with this. So they saw about a 24% increase in maintenance requirements when they dosed with LPS. So this is quite an acute, just kind of a quick effect. I think liver abscesses are a longer term effect, maybe not that extreme at one point, right? But a longer term effect. This is an area of research I think we could begin doing more research on. I'm going to skip this one. This just kind of shows the progression of how the liver repairs and fixes itself if it's had some type of injury or abscess. It also uses more ATP. So this is in humans, but they showed that when there are liver abscesses, more ATP is diverted directly to those abscesses to help with take care of those and heal those abscesses. Okay, so why is growth efficiency decreased in calves with liver abscesses? And I think really probably a large part of that increase in energy requirement is the abscess portion. So it influences the liver and the gut absorptive surface. There's also systemic effects throughout the body to try to handle that. And it's compounded with other stressors. So there can be a lot of stressors that occur through all these stages um, of feeding an animal from birth up until finishing. One of the challenges, it is difficult to study liver abscesses when they are occurring, right? So it's very difficult to diagnose and determine when they occur during the feeding period. A lot of times cattle don't look that much different. It might visually would be difficult to determine unless it was quite severe. And even through blood blood samples or other kind of diagnostic ultrasounds and things like that haven't worked very good to try to look at these types of things over time. So a lot of times we only have information from at slaughter time, and that for sure doesn't represent all that time from birth up until till slaughter. So um, hopefully we can get a better understanding of this and a better way to try to look at abscesses over time. So, but we need to focus on the entire management system over the whole feeding period and then understand when things are happening. So, just a couple recommendations. From birth, we need to focus on the management from birth to all the way on, right? Um, minimize stress, have good health programs, good nutrition programs. Also related to nutrition, I think, first of all, just meeting requirements, things like amino acids, minerals, vitamins, glucose. Um, a lot of times we overdo things, or maybe sometimes things aren't characterized very well on what the requirements are, especially I think during stressful periods, right? Um, and no doubt requirements increase over those periods. So, but um, we know amino acids, minerals, vitamins, other things can have positive effects on kind of taking care of these health and stress factors, and there's probably potential to study those more. Um, and maybe especially in young animals and following those to see if those have effects later on in the feeding period. Okay, so yeah, I just put a slide here to suggest that we need to continue to do more research on kind of energetics and tissue energy use during um, these different phases of the feeding period and also relative to health and stress factors. Okay, Fred, so that's all I have for slides. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to discuss, or if people have comments as well.
I thank you very much for the presentation. And we're a fairly small group today. If folks want to go ahead and just unmute and ask questions directly, we'll give a couple of seconds. Otherwise, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. My beef cohort from Iowa, Denise, can't believe you don't have a question. Apparently, that's true. Okay. What's the percent or amount of growth loss? Do you have a sense? Or when we have lung issues in calves, I mean, is that something we can put a quantitative number to?
Yeah, that's a good question. Aside from liver things, um, well, it does make up it is a huge issue, right? So, and people have calculated dollar values and things of BRD effects and things like that. Um, and it depends on the severity of the lung problems. But I think it could be very significant. I don't have a number exactly, but it could be 20 to 50% depending on, I suppose it could be 100% if that animal ends up not making it, right? So,
Yep. Okay, Jim, I see you've unmuted. Do you have a question for us?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Kendall, what's the future of liver abscesses? Are we going to be able to solve that issue? What are the contributing factors? Is it
yeah,
early life? Is it diets we feed? And then is there any way to kind of fix, I'm not sure that's the right term, but to reduce the amount of energy that these livers burn up so we can improve the feed efficiency in these animals?
yeah. Maybe I'll start with the second one first. Um, and I think one of the ways we could um, make those animals more efficient or their liver more efficient is more closely meeting nutrient requirements of those animals. I think traditionally we've probably overfed protein for a lot of different reasons for a long time. Um, and that probably does have negative consequences on the energetics of the liver and probably even the mass of the liver. It might be small, but if we think about all the cattle that are fed, it would end up being could be a big number, right? So part of the issue is um, a lot of times the feeds we feed because of the price of the feeds and how they price into into the system, right? So that's why one reason why we've overfed protein. The other reason might be because it's safe, right? We think it's safe to do that. We don't want to be deficient. Um, yeah, so that's the second one. The first one, are we going to make progress on liver abscesses? Which is a great question. And when are they happening? What's the causative factors? Um, those aren't easy questions to answer. I'm a nutritionist, so of course I think nutrition is really important, right? But I think it's a lot more than that. Um, I think it's really nutrition, health, stress, all those things um, combined, and they kind of compound on each other. Um, I think in the past we've probably thought a lot of the liver abscesses are developing later in the feeding period, but I don't know. I'm wondering if they actually more of it is happening earlier and maybe during transition periods. You think like weaning time, they may eat a little bit, kind of transition into that dry feeding, and then uh, after a little bit feed really well, and then really go to town, right? Um, and overeat. So that could be a time. And then once you get that kind of eating pattern programmed, it's hard sometimes to get kind of consistent eating and nutrition moving forward. Um, so yeah, those are a couple thoughts on that. Whether we get there, I know a lot more people are doing research on it, and it's funny because people um, like TG Nagaraga from um, Kansas State has been doing research on this for a long time, right? And these research areas kind of come and go. And there used to be a lot. Now there's a lot again in that same area. So, but hopefully we can make some progress on the diagnostic side of it or on better tracking them through the entire feeding period so we can get an idea on some of the times we really need to focus on and and what could we do during those times to help make it better.
Hey, Minnie asked the question, beyond diets, you talked a lot about cellular action within the animal. What part does hydration play?
Well, that's a good question, and can be a concern, like if calves have scours and things like that, right? Um, I'm sure it's probably another complicated compounding factor. Now, I don't know how long, that can be pretty common in young calves. I'm not sure it's much of an issue later on, unless there could be some if there's some more severe acidosis problems or other kind of digestive issues that occur. One of the questions I have though are, do events like that early in life kind of imprint that animal later in life to respond differently to stress, Um, so that's a really hard thing to try to figure out and understand. But
Okay, you talked about overfeeding protein, and I'm going to break that down. What amino acids do we need to look at more critically that you suspect are culprits in this issue?
yeah, yeah. So I guess in some of the research we've done, we've thought more about kind of strategic use of amino acids. And we've done some work with leucine and with arginine. Um, but if we overfeed, right, what are the specific amino acids? Um, and it would be the kind of the ones there with the highest concentrations, I guess. But I think it's really all of them. Maybe to a little lesser extent, lysine, histidine, and methionine, because those might be perhaps kind of the first limiting amino acids. But I think when we overfeed, I don't think it's a really one specific amino acid. I think it's more all of them because the animal's just trying to clear that excess. Right?
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box. I've got one more question that came in. As you mentioned, stress was an issue. What do you see with these higher carcass rates? So we're seeing, obviously we have a lot of late-term dads. Uh,
Yeah.
no explanation, but what are you seeing as far as liver issues on these larger carcasses?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like the liver abscess thing is so interesting, right? Because um, usually in our research cattle, we see very few liver abscesses. Um, and even like sometimes even if we try to adapt animals really fast or something to get them to have acidosis, they won't do it, right? But then other times when you're not trying to, they might end up getting it. But yeah, I'm sure I would think the rates are probably increasing. Um, Also lameness and other issues like that. Plus just increasing fat. Fat increases inflammation and things like that in the body. So um, yeah, that is a interesting thing to kind of understand. And I'm not sure it's going to slow down the increased carcass size, and not for a while anyway.
Our last presenter Warren Rushi, doesn't predict they're going to slow down any. So, okay, thank you, Dr. Swanson, for sharing this information and your insights on liver issues with steers having dairy genetics in the beef industry. This program has been recorded and will be available on the I-29 Moo University website located at i-29moou.com. Give us 3 to 5 working days to get it up. In addition, I will email you when it is available, and I will include the link to the program evaluation. I've got that link there in the chat box right now. Thank you for your participation, and I look forward to seeing you at the Beef on Dairy Dialogue webinar next month. At this point, thank you again, Dr. Swanson, and we will end the program.
And thank you to you and everyone for tuning in.